welcome our listeners and our viewers back on Salam Media Live right here on Wednesday night with myself, Inayat Wadi. And we were due to start this particular segment of the panel discussion a bit earlier, but unfortunately, one of our guests, Dr. Pali Lahotla, founder of the Pan-African Institute for Evidence and former Statistician General, is unavailable. Apparently, he's on the Gauteng train, so he will not be able to connect with us. But what we do have, or who we have, is political analyst and trustee of Public Interest SA. We've got Tebogo Khas with us this evening. Tebogo, good evening to you, sir. Welcome, and we thank you for your time.
Good evening, and thank you for having me, Knight.
Yes, obviously we are talking about a huge problem. We're talking about a massive problem in South Africa, and we're talking about unemployment, and this is right across the board, across the entire nation, and which includes youth unemployment in South Africa. Now, the theme of this discussion is unemployment, a violent assault on South Africans, and also unraveling the devastating impact of joblessness on our nation's social and ethical fabric. And we know the damage as a result of unemployment is huge, and it cannot even be quantified. This is how big a problem it has been, Tebogo.
No, certainly it is a real and present danger, which, if not alleviated or addressed decisively, it has all the elements of causing much bigger societal problems in future. And at the heart of it all is whether, from a policy perspective, real and appropriate tools are being identified and put in place to address the issue of unemployment, because as it is, the situation is currently extremely untenable.
Yes. Now, as a political analyst, and I'm sure that you've had the opportunity to unravel some of these issues, some of the reasons, and also to unpack, why unemployment has become such a cancer that is spreading. It is a scourge that is spreading day by day. It's not a problem that is going away, despite many initiatives in the past, despite many statements, and looking at it from a political perspective, clearly that, this country is in danger if the trajectory of unemployment continues unchecked and unattended over a period of time.
Some pundits argue that the Labor Relations or Labor Act amendments or framework amendment of the early 90s or mid-90s, when the new government took over, may have had unintended consequences. Whereas initially they may have been geared towards ensuring equity as well as removing barriers that or challenges that were imposed by apartheid hiring patterns, including Employment Equity Act, for example. It may very well be that some of those actually set the tone and maybe the framework that would make it difficult for jobs to actually be created, as well as to ensure that we absorb the new crop of youth that would be swelling the employment ranks. You would recall that the Employment Equity Act, while as it sought to seek parity, in most instances it has seen a negative plus in terms of attracting new job creation. But not only that, the rigid employment framework, which also applies to even the small business sector, has just made it difficult for the private sector, or continues to make it difficult for the private sector to actually absorb the unemployed. For example, if you are a small business operator, you are being held to the same standards as a listed entity insofar as your minimum wage is concerned, insofar as the number of hours, insofar as and many other elements that talk to that, which in all instances or in most instances renders most businesses anti-competitive, especially if you are partaking in a global village, economic village, as we are since the dawn of democracy, when South Africa was welcome. Now, you compare us with labor markets such as the US or the European market, where you can actually attract or lay off as and when you feel the business demands. We are constrained by that. So I'm playing the devil's advocate here on behalf of big business and say that just makes it difficult for people to absorb, because remember, shareholders or entrepreneurs who start business, they take risks with the hope of making a profit. That is the whole idea behind entrepreneurship. But if you take a risk that you know that you might be entangled with it, to the extent that you might not be able to, there are no flexibility of hiring or releasing those excess that you might demand as excess capacity into the market. People will be very careful not to absorb any extra labor that is available in the market. And here I'm just talking not as an expert on labor issues or on policy issues, but the fact of the matter is, for as long as we have more youth coming out of high school institution, tertiary institution, further education, what do you call the FETs, colleges, who with an expectation of being absorbed, and yet there's not enough opportunities, you are going to find the situation as it is. And this is also exacerbated by economic performance. Even well before COVID hit these shores, our economy was not performing well, and you need a certain growth rate to be able to create the opportunity to absorb the unemployed. Even in the best of times, when we were recording around 5 or closer to 6% economic growth during Trevor Manuel era as finance minister, we had jobless, what many people called jobless growth. In other words, whereas the economy was growing, there was no absorption of the labor market. So it's even worse now if you throw in bad economic indicators and even interventions, unforeseen interventions such as COVID-19 that we've gone through.
Yes, but we know of the unforeseen interventions, but there have been many attempts in the past in terms of interventions. We've seen the various labor summits. We see it year after year. We see the presidents. We see the State of the Nation address. The issue of unemployment has been addressed all the time, and yet we are in a situation, and you speak about youth unemployment, which is sitting at around 70%, Tebogo. And again, just looking at the theme that we have for this discussion, a violent assault on South Africans. And the key issue here is, for how much longer is the country, are South Africans able to sustain this trajectory of unemployment, which is in an upward trend? And clearly, this country is sitting on a knife's edge at this point in time.
It's a ticking time bomb, in one sense. It's a ticking time bomb that we are sitting on. To the extent that those who are graduating from institutions of higher learning may not be matched with the demands of the market, it creates a mismatch of sorts in terms of the pool from which the private sector can and will be able to draw from. In the past, it used to be that when you go to university or even TVT colleges, they were called Ambach and other names in the past, you knew that when you left there, you'd be a fitter and turner, and there will already be a company that is willing and already is waiting for you to finish your training so they can be able to absorb you. We've shifted a lot of manufacturing opportunities, not wittingly and unwittingly, to the likes of China. I mean, if you look at the spawning of ISCO as an example, ensure that most of the steel work opportunities would have been taken over either by Mittal Asolo, or China also came into the play after the 2002 invitation and joining the WTO, and then China became the factory of the world. And with that said, it just made it difficult for emerging economies such as South Africa to actually compete and therefore make sure that the demand for labor. You have to look at the clothing sector itself. We used to have a thriving clothing sector in Newcastle area and even in Salt River. I'm not sure what the situation is today, but it is woefully not performing to the extent that it ought to. So there's quite a lot of factors that actually contribute to this. Some of them are man-made, and some of them are largely because of the circumstances of the vagaries of global economic arbitrage, and which is what we find ourselves in.
Yes, well, let's just for a minute or two focus on some of these man-made problems, and let's look at South Africa. Let's just look at the government. Let's look at the performance, and we know that South African unemployment is about the highest in the entire world. And even if we compare ourselves to certain countries in Africa that have performed, so much better than us here in South Africa. And again, right at the top, we're looking at the government, we're looking at the president. We've seen organizations like Business Unity South Africa, joint statements being issued, so many measures that they've been talking about, but all of this to no avail, and which brings us back to the issue that we'd like to also talk about, how this is actually impacted on the social fabric of our society, Tebogo.
You'd recall, Inayat, that government once came with the Jobs Fund, which was funded by some proceeds or some levies coming from the seaters. And there was a couple of billions that were seated in there. And you ask yourself, did government realize the objectives of the Job Fund to the extent that it was meant to absorb or to deal with the problem of unemployment? And that was many years ago, more than 15 years ago. The question is, do we implement the kind of policies the nice policies that we might have, or we come with these policies and just serve them? So there's a disconnect or lack of coherence in terms of policy and implementation. That disjuncture is a permanent malady that is afflicting our government to the extent that we now have a problem that is only going up instead of coming down. We can have all the beautiful NDP 2030, 2050, whatever it is, but to the extent that we don't seem to see coherence, especially in policy implementation, and making sure that people see through in terms of implementing the policies. When we have got changes in ministries or administrations, for example, you find that new ministers come up with their own focus areas without really saying, what is the plan, the global master plan that we had? If you take countries like India, many years ago, they had a 50-year plan, and Malaysia, which they steadfastly made sure that in spite of their administrative changes or changes in administrations, that would withstand that and make sure that people get to rally around a common call or a mantra, which is in the case of Malaysia, for example, Boleh Malay, which is Malaysia can. And it meant they knew that they can arrest some of the problems, including unemployment, which they certainly did. But in our case, we seem to have all these beautiful platitudes about job funds and all that. CETAs, you ask yourself, what is the efficacy, if any? All we see is a lot of corruption that is happening in there. And you cannot divorce corruption from the problems of unemployment that we have. We've got instances where individuals who are not qualified for the job get to be employed only because they are politically connected or there's nepotism in the system, especially in the public sector. Now, to the extent that this is the case, we find that the output, even from the public sector, doesn't meet the objectives of creating sustainable environment to absorbing more youth into unemployment. And remember, government is not a creator of jobs. So when you hear the province's Premier Panyaza Sufi say they're creating a program of Nasispani, that is not sustainable to the extent that it will be able to make, it won't make a dent, not even make a dent insofar as the 60, 70, or closer to 70% youth unemployment that you reference. And so the question is, do we really have leadership? Talk to leadership, talk to decisiveness, whether dealing with corruption, whether making sure that people get to deliver as per the script. We don't seem to have that. And that is the issue of, that's what we could refer to as man-made, because we're creating problems for ourselves, or we identify a problem and say we're creating a solution, and yet we don't implement whatever recommendations or plans that we put across.
Well, definitely, and clearly, tobacco, this is a whole issue surrounding social justice because if we can't find jobs for our people, if we can't find jobs for our youth, there is no future for them, and they see this dark cloud and they don't see any silver lining at the end of the tunnel. Clearly, we have got a major problem because we're seeing the type of societal problems on a day-to-day basis. We're seeing serious health problems, we see, including young children. We see problems with families. We see marriages. We see, just generally people not being able to pay their bills because they are so steep or deep rooted into poverty and hardship that they can't even think straight. And at the end of the day, when the government thinks that, social grants may be the answer to the problem, really, we cannot maintain, we cannot sustain this any further.
You're hitting the nail on the head because there's no honor in unemployment. There's no honor in poverty. And when you're sitting at home with a degree or diploma in one hand, and you're looking at your family, they're looking at you as the only hope to be able to provide or to eke out a livelihood for them, and you can't. It just creates a worse scenario in terms of societal ills. It forces then people to look at alternative ways of earning an income, and that is when it becomes easy for people to say, I can make quick money then, or I can make a quick buck here and there. And then that's when criminality also starts or sets in, especially to those. Because when you are weak and vulnerable, you are vulnerable. When you are poor, when you are unemployed, you are vulnerable. To being taken advantage of, and maybe even stepping out of line and doing things that you otherwise ordinarily not do. And that is contributing to the societal ills. And when you are idle and sitting at home and have got nothing to do or to keep you busy, you'll end up in activities that creates a burden onto society, that is procreating, and therefore then putting a strain on the social net, on the social system net. Those are the problems that invariably will come out of it. And once that steps in, then you will start saying, how do I deal with the psychological effects of my unemployment? It's either you're going to find refuge in substance use or abuse, and then you're piling up on the problem of society that we have. I have family members and friends, kids who have been lost to drugs, who have been lost because they're sitting home doing nothing. And the only way they could find use of a time is recreational, what starts as a recreational use of substances. By the time you know it, they are all irretrievably gone down the drain, and then that creates a problem to society. So you're quite right. These man-made problems, it's just a domino effect that comes out of unemployment, and which, if dealt decisively, you would be able to alleviate or mitigate most of these social ills that we are now confronted with, in the end, put a burden not only on the state but the taxpayer, who then have to make sure that through their taxes they try to provide for the kind of morass that we find ourselves in. So it is quite a very difficult, and it's a ticking time bomb, because it's just a matter of time. You'd recall when the EFF was launched around 2013, I think, or before it was launched. One of the comments that Julius Malema said at the time was, it was quite controversial, and he said, we will march from Alexandra across the road to Sentin and open your fridges and help ourselves to the cheese, the milk, all the goodies in your fridge. I'm paraphrasing here. And trash your places. Indeed, that day has come. It may not have come practically or literally in the sense that he may have articulated it, but invariably it has. Because of the criminal element that is mainly caused by lack of employment opportunities, people have sought to find ways to make a living. That makes them look at cable theft. You look at infrastructure plunder, rail system being plundered, connecting to the grid, creating alternative illicit ESCOM prepaid vouchers. That on its own finds itself fertile ground, because it is easy for somebody sitting at home with nothing to do to say, I can make a quick buck if I join this group and be involved in this type of criminality. And because of the lack of adequate system to provide for that type of eventuality or to mitigate that type of eventuality, that is why we're sitting with this problem, which will actually like I'm saying, it's a ticking time bomb, because you just don't know now what would happen next when all the infrastructure has been, public infrastructure has been planned. When it happened in the past, it used to be that it was us and them. It would be somebody in the poor communities and us in the affluent areas. We built 5-meter high walls, hoping that we'll isolate or insulate ourselves from the societal problem. Guess what? When you drive out of this 5-meter walled house, you're going to be met with problems on the road, on the traffic light, where there'll be you're susceptible to criminal attacks, either through breaking into your car or any other thing. And that the root cause of that is largely unemployment. Obviously, you cannot deal with all elements of criminality through employment, creating employment opportunities, but it will certainly go a long way towards dealing with this societal ill, which is crime. But the biggest thing is when a coordinated uprising, as you've seen in July 27, I don't know, it was last year 21, the year before last, because people look across the street, they see a factory, they see a shop, in their mind, they don't understand what their action on that particular day may have an impact on the general society or communities within which they live. They look at an opportunity for them to feed themselves and their family today. And some of them is just pure criminal element. But the impact of that is that now most of the shops are not recovering. Most factories have been burned down to the ground. Those with insurance, they'll probably get, but some of them are not reopening where they were opening. So in the end, then that also feeds into that. So you're creating a society that is easy to be influenced, to be involved in illicit or antisocial behavior.
Well, definitely, and obviously, we see all the despair, we see the unhappiness, we see the anguish, we see the desperation, but also, issues like mental health, how this has been impacted as a result of unemployment. There's just so much tension around at this point in time. There's so much insecurity. Even things like suicide. That also needs to be addressed, because all of this is as a result of this. And the one point that you made, Tobacco, is this divide, this class divide. Now, having come from a history of racism where we were divided on racial grounds, now we are looking at this class divide. And we see it. We see the rich getting richer. We hear about it. The poor getting poorer. And this class divide obviously spells a lot of danger going forward for us as a country.
Absolutely. And every day you get hit by stories such as what was reported on in News 24 and Network today, where it is alleged that kids and their friends who are related to the deputy president got to find opportunities directed at them, from construction to supplying in the healthcare sector to doing things that are completely diverse sectors only because they are politically connected. In other words, it pays to be politically connected, or it pays to actually have friends who are politically connected, because that way you won't have to face the same unemployment queue as the rest of the youth is concerned. And I'm talking about youngsters, early 20s, the elders would have been 30 or 28. And we're saying that when unemployed youth look at that, the resentment is there. Yes, there might be some envy when they see you pop out an expensive bottle of whiskey at an affluent restaurant or nightclub, but there is incipient resentment that it will take a time where youth will rise up and say, you the bougies, or you the haves and the have-mores, we have nothing. It's about time that we're going to take, not to work to earn it, but to take from what you have, because you took from society as well through your connections. You took from society because you didn't follow processes that otherwise we would have made equal access to those opportunities. So you had a head start, and you denied us that head start. Now we want to march into your fridges, into your home, and here I'm using the metaphor of marching into the fridges. But they will rise up, and all you need is just a small spark, to light this tinderbox, and that's why we're headed. Unless something drastic happens. When something drastic happens, I don't think so. I don't see that happening with the current administration, especially under the ANC government. And I'm not by any stretch of imagination agitating for the removal of any government or the ANC government. But I'm just saying that unless anybody who's in charge, any administration that is in charge, take drastic steps to address the unemployment issue head on, we're in for a big hiding.
Well, definitely. But also, I think, obviously the government is one factor, but also taking a look at big business and looking at business interests, because at the end of the day, we know that, everybody's in here to make money. You're in here to make profit, and the profit motive as well. And especially in today's time and age, in the digital age, a lot of information is available to everybody right across the entire world, to the extent that we know what CEOs of companies are earning, and some of them are actually insane, when one looks at some of the figures that are being thrown about as well. And people have access to this information. And when one sees this, this class divide that we speak about, that I think is extremely, extremely dangerous, Tebogo. And again, we see government coming together. We see them coming together with big business. They talk, and it's become more of a talk shop when we speak about all these employment summits and labor summits, and we've seen nothing materialize. Just in your mind, and I know we are running out of time, Tebogo, just in your mind, looking at the interventions that are necessary at this point in time to address this problem, what would they be?
We need more investment by the private sector in the economy. There's a lot of, we believe, capital that is not being unlocked for whatever reasons. That could be used to actually invest in the local economy. But it is not easy to do so when most companies are actually forced to downsize for extraneous issues. I mean, every time you speak to people, they'll tell you, we're using less of this office space, we must downsize, and we don't see lots of factories coming up in terms of manufacturing. And we need a deliberate intervention that will seek to create incentives for people or for companies to actually invest in the manufacturing sector. And we also need to ensure that we put to effect opportunities that are brought about by the likes of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and how to create a crop of entrepreneurs who would then be able to manufacture and be able to be export ready and partake in the export into. But one thing more important, maybe as a last parting shot on my side, is we need to ensure that the multilateral or bilateral agreements that we have with multi-stakeholder bodies like BRICS or G20 or the UN work to our advantage. Because if you look at BRICS itself, for example, we've got the likes of China actually also killing our economy. Look at what is happening to Transnet. They are not supplying with the space for the rolling stock. Now, the ports are closed. The ports are not functional. There's a dysfunctional. So we need to ensure that there's a deliberate attempts or action that is taken to ensure that you remove those things and make sure that you put South Africa first. Not even Africa first. You put South Africa first. Once South Africa is thriving, is able to do its own thing and detect properly where it wants to go and follow its path, will it be able to serve the rest of the continent and the rest of the world well? But we need to be inward looking instead of being more outward looking and pleasing others.
Well, Tebogo, thank you very much for that. And I know, sadly, our other guest was not able to join us, because I'm sure, it would have made, in fact, you've unpacked so much. But obviously, I know you said you're not going to be doing justice, but you certainly have. And I do appreciate your time with us this evening.
I would have been happy to be a fly on the wall and watching Dr. Padi take us through his thoughts and insights in terms of what this whole issue of unemployment. But thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this vexing question with you. And I hope somewhere somebody or other people will come up with lasting solutions to address that problem.
Well, no problem. At some point in time, we should get Dr. Pali back. But for now, we thank you. We do appreciate your time once again. All the best to you, sir. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Tebogo Gas with us this evening, trustee of Public Interest SA, with us on the broadcast. And it is clear that the whole scourge of unemployment, a cancer that has been eating through South Africa's situation, getting even worse, to the extent that South Africa has got one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. But the social problems that unemployment actually brings, and to a large extent, as Tebogo Gas said, we are on a ticking time bomb if this is not addressed. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, and once again, it's been an absolute pleasure being with you right here on Salam Media on Wednesday night with myself, Inayat Wadi. From myself and the team, until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.